Eto Comic Club, July 2025, iZombie, Trade Paperback, Volume 1, by Chris Roberson, Michael Allred, and Laura Allred, collecting iZombie 2010, issues 1 to 5. Content and trigger warnings: cannibalism, domestic abuse, mentions of religion, and religious topics. Chris Roberson, he, him pronouns, and the writer of iZombie, started out with a degree in English literature in the 90s, largely unpublished, writing a number of novels in various genres, including mystery and sci-fi. During this period, Roberson had a number of day jobs, including a 7-year stint as a product support engineer for Dell Computers. Between 1998 and 2002, Roberson was part of the writers' collective called Clockwork Storybook, alongside comic book creators Bill Willingham, most famously known for the Fable series, Lila Sturgis, a trans writer. She co-wrote Jack of Fables and relaunched the House of Mystery comic series for Vertigo, and novelist Mark Finn. Starting as a writing group that would swap and critique each other's stories, Clockwork Storybook developed into a monthly online anthology, then a publishing imprint of the same name. The collective attempted to capitalize on the growing trend of print on demand and launched with 4 print titles in early 2001. Roberson produced 4 novels for Clockwork Storybook, 3 of which were subsequently expanded and reprinted. After a couple of years, the Clockwork Storybook collective fell apart, and the individual authors went their separate ways. In 2003, Roberson also co-started up his own small press publishing house, Monkey Brain, having discovered in the few years of helping run the Clockwork Storybook imprint that Roberson really enjoyed being a publisher. Roberson decided early on that the company would deal exclusively in traditional, offset trade paperbacks and hardcovers distributed internationally. Chris first started working for DC in 2008 through their imprint Vertigo, also known as Vertigo Comics or DC Vertigo. This was around the same time as the Siegel estate was given half the copyright to Action Comics issue 1, acknowledging the work of Superman co-creator Jerry Siegel, who had died in 1996. This may sound like an irrelevant detail to us discussing Chris Roberson, but tuck that factoid under your proverbial hats, because it's going to come back up quite soon. Anyway, Vertigo publishes comics with adult content such as nudity, drug use, profanity, and graphic violence that do not fit the restrictions of DC's main line. Its comics include company-owned series set in the DC universe, such as The Sandman, Swamp Thing, and Hellblazer, and creator-owned works such as Preacher, Why the Last Man, and Fables. The Vertigo imprint went into a decline in the 2010s, ultimately being discontinued in early 2020 and replaced with DC Black Label with Sandman-related titles, retaining their new branding as The Sandman Universe. DC Vertigo relaunched in 2024 with titles still running as part of DC Black Label transferred to Vertigo, and the Sandman Universe books folded back into the imprint too. Chris Robertson's first DC series was the 6-issue Vertigo miniseries Cinderella from Fabletown with Love, set in former Clockwork Storybook collective writer Bill Willingham's Fables universe, with fairy tale characters mixing in with the modern world. The story of this spin-off being about a spy version of Cinderella traveling to Dubai to prevent the sale of magical items to non-magical people, then confronting the totalitarian government of the fairy godmother, hence the Bond reference of the series name. After that, Chris Roberson was brought in to finish out an arc on the Superman book called Superman Grounded, after J. Michael Krasinski left the 11-issue arc halfway through to focus on other projects, alongside a sequel miniseries to the Cinderella miniseries, subtitled Fables Are Forever, along with kicking off the iZombie series. Roberson also wrote 2 issues in 2011 of the Superman/Batman series for an arc called World's Finest. iZombie was the final work that Chris Roberson has done for DC. To divulge the why, a big tangent is required about Watchmen and Alan Moore, so grab your veggies and strap in for a ride. In 1986, Alan Moore wrote a 12-issue limited series called Watchmen with art by Dave Gibbons and coloring by John Higgins that was then collected in a single-volume trade in 1987. Watchmen originated from a story proposal Moore submitted to DC featuring superhero characters that the company had acquired from Charlton Comics. A reminder for those who didn't catch our Blue Beetle comic club that Charlton Comics' action heroes line included Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, The Question, Peacemaker, and Judo Master. As Moore's proposed story would have left many of the characters unusable for future stories, managing editor Dick Giordano convinced Moore to create original characters instead. The series was a critical and commercial success, with Moore and Gibbons earning 8% of the series' earnings. It was the only comic to crack Time's 100 Greatest Books list and is one of the highest-selling comics of all time. Back in 1985, Moore even stated that if the limited series was well received, Moore and Gibbons would possibly create a 12-issue prequel series called Minutemen. DC pitched potential sequels to the duo, but neither man felt the story would have gone anywhere, with Moore particularly adamant that DC not go forward with stories by other individuals. Gibbons was more attracted to the idea of a Minutemen series because it would have paid homage to the simplicity and unsophisticated nature of the Golden Age comic books. Despite an agreement between the creators and DC that DC would not profit off merch, DC Comics released a limited edition badge, button display card set, featuring characters and images from the series. 10,000 sets of the 4 badges, including a replica of the bloodstained smiley face badge worn by a character in the Watchmen story, were released and sold. Moore was reassured after initially voicing disgruntlement that they weren't merch, just promo material. DC learnt their lesson, right? And never did anything like this again, right? Not quite. In 1987, there were 2 Watchmen modules to a DC Heroes role-playing game, which DC didn't tell the Watchmen creators was being made. They managed to talk Moore down from getting upset, and the modules ended up getting direct involvement from Alan Moore, who is credited with special design and concepts contribution, as well as co-writing the essay The World of the Watchmen with game author Ray Winiger, to ensure the lore was in line with the comics. Moore has claimed that fine print in the contracts regarding Watchmen and V for Vendetta, which stipulated that the ownership rights would revert to Moore and the artists after the stories had gone out of publication, had tricked him into believing he would eventually retain ownership, only to discover that DC had no intention of ceasing publication of the stories, effectively preventing the ownership from ever returning to Moore. This ultimately led to Moore leaving DC in 1989. In 2010, Moore said that DC offered him the rights to Watchmen back if he would agree to prequel and sequel projects. Moore said that, if they said that 10 years ago, when I asked them for that, then yeah, it might have worked. But these days, I don't want Watchmen back. Certainly, I don't want it back under those kinds of terms. DC Comics co-publishers Dan DiDio and Jim Lee responded, DC Comics would only revisit these iconic characters if the creative vision of any proposed new stories matched the quality set by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons nearly 25 years ago, and our first discussion on any of this would naturally be with the creators themselves. Paul Levitz, who had been publisher of DC Comics from 2002 through 2009, had enforced the non-official doctrine that DC had that the only way there would ever be a Watchmen sequel would be if Alan Moore made it. It was expected Jim Lee and Dan DiDio would continue this doctrine, as they publicly stated in 2010, especially given after Alan Moore left DC in 1989, he spent most of the 90s working for Jim Lee at Image. Following months of rumors about a potential Watchmen follow-up project, in February 2012, DC announced it was publishing 7 prequel series under the Before Watchmen banner. Among the creators involved were writers J. Michael Krasinski, Brian Azzarello, Darwin Cook, and Len Wein, and artists Lee Bermejo, Adam Hughes, Andy Kubert, Joe Kubert, and Amanda Connor. Gibbons released a short statement saying, while Watchmen was a complete work, he appreciated DC's reasons for this initiative and wished the artists and writers involved to pay and he knew that they were going to pay tribute to our work and wanted to pay tribute to our work. May these new editions have the success that they desire. Moore criticized the project as completely shameless, and he was not interested in monetary compensation and hated that the standalone nature of Watchmen, which gave it the integrity of literary work, was going to be rendered as unexceptional as possible with indefinitely running sequels and spin-offs. So this Before Watchmen saga all unfolded in 2012, right around the time that the Seagulls, remember that Superman tangent from 25 minutes ago, were being countersued by DC Comics during the years of 2010 through 2013 regarding who owned the rights to Superman. Chris Roberson cites these 2 controversies as the proverbial straw on the camel's back about how much he disliked the way it seemed that DC regards its creators that are working for them. Roberson had already signed a contract by that point to do 6 more issues of iZombie, of which 3 had been turned in, and so Roberson just made the decision to go ahead and turn in the remaining 3, not wanting to jeopardize the livelihood of his collaborators Mike and Laura Allred. But once Roberson turned in the last one, even though Roberson had other work lined up, a third Cinderella Fables miniseries included, Roberson, for his own peace of mind, let people know via Twitter that he wasn't happy. Roberson publicly stated he had no intention of working for DC again after those final contracts were complete and has stayed true to his word. Because of similar ethics, Chris Roberson has similarly never done work for Marvel Comics. Within 2 hours of his tweets questioning the ethics of the DC company being quoted on Bleeding Cool, a comic news website that I personally don't like because they come across as rather anti-progressive politically in their reporting, Roberson was called and told he was no longer employed by the company, being that third Fables Cinderella series being cancelled outright and iZombie concluding with its 28th issue. As a return to the tangent, DC's continued kicking desecrating Moore and Gibbons' original vision in 2016 by intermingling the Watchmen universe with the DC universe, with one of the Watchmen characters involved in the killing of Tim Drake, as he was deemed a chess piece that could have toppled the whole board, and the Watchmen fought various DC characters in the 2017 through 2019 Doomsday's Clock series by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. As for the rights of iZombie, the rights will revert a certain amount of time after Mike Allred and Chris Roberson are no longer commissioned to do new work. Chris Roberson continued publishing house Monkey Brain, expanding into the digital comic space, and some have said that the modern comic market would not exist without Monkey Brain comics having happened, paving the way for Comixology, Marvel Unlimited Comics, or DC Infinite. The Monkey Brains company wasn't built to make money but enable creators. Monkey Brains stopped operations in the mid-2010s, but Adam P. Nave, who was pivotal in the website design, says that Monkey Brain didn't stop because it failed. It didn't stop because of lack of sales or interest. It stopped because it worked, changing the industry and broke new digital comics ground, fading away so newer mechanisms built on ideas that Monkey Brain started could push forward even further. Additionally, Chris Roberson has worked for Dark Horse as co-writer of Hellboy and the BPRD, Witchfinder, Rise of the Black Flame, and other titles set in the world of Mike Mignola's Hellboy. He's also worked on God of War, Prometheus, and Stranger Things comics at Dark Horse. He's worked for Boom Studios on Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Dust to Dust, Starborn, Elkrick, The Balance Lost, as well as a random Adventure Times comic. He's worked for Dynamite Entertainment on multiple comics, including Doc Savage and The Shadow. Michael and Laura Allred are a married duo that work together and are rarely not mentioned in the same breath, to the point that it's actually tough locating projects where the two haven't collaborated with one another. Michael doing the art and sometimes the writing, and Laura doing the coloring, producing a relatively unique comic pop art style unique to the modern comic industry. The duo met at Brigham Young University, Idaho, and were both in the art department. The university was founded, supported, and guided by the Church of Jesus Christ, or Latter-day Saints, also known as the Latter Days Saints Church, LDS Church, or Mormon Church, one of the newer religions having only existed since the 1830s. In one interview, Michael has self-identified as a progressive Mormon. After marrying Laura Allred, Michael changed his major from art to broadcasting to ensure he could find work after school. Graduated, then fresh out of college, his working career began as a radio host in Oregon, then got recruited by the military to join the Air Force Academy while starting a family, going on to work for the Armed Forces Network, being a television reporter in Europe. During a period back in Oregon, he was encouraged by Laura to take a chance on turning his hobby of writing and drawing comics into something more. Mike's first comic, titled M. Dalton's Allreds Dead Air, was completed while Mike taught film at the Air Force Academy. The project was originally written as a screenplay, but a friend suggested that Mike draw it. Mike hadn't read comics in years. The death of Gwen Stacy, that cold turkey, stopped him from buying comics. That same friend got Mike back into comics with titles like The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. It was also this friend that introduced Mike to his first professional contact, writer Stephen T. Siegel, one of the four guys that created Ben 10. Mike's second comic was an anthology called Graphique Musique, which was inspired by the work of the Hernandez brothers on Love and Rockets. Allred has explained how Graphique Musique, like a lot of his work, has a lot of music references. Mike's all-time favorite comic story to this day is the Galactus Trilogy, a story released in Fantastic Four Volume 1, issues 48 through 50 in 1966, even having a copy of issue 48 signed by the late Stan Lee himself. Starting in 1990's Creatures of the Id, issue 1, Mike Allred created Madman, a former deadly assassin, Zane Townstead, that was resurrected from the dead by two brilliant but mad scientists. With no memory of his previous life, he is given the name Frank Einstein and begins a new life as Madman, a superhero who questions his place in the universe. A creator-owned comic, the comics have been published by Caliber Comics, Tundra, IDW Publishing, Image Comics, Oni Press, Dark Horse Comics, and AAA Pop over the years, under the main comic titles Madman Comics, Madman, Madman Adventures, and Madman Atomic Comics, and various spin-offs including It Girl and the Atomics, Mr. Gum, Red Rocket, and X-Ray Robot. The late comedian Robin Williams was a fan of the Madman comics, even wearing a Madman shirt for a televised HBO's comic relief special. Allred drew part of the 1993 World's End story arc in Neil Gaiman's The Sandman series. Kevin Smith was also a Mad Men fan, having Michael Allred appear as himself in the 1997 feature film Chasing Amy as part of the opening scene at a comic book convention, signing copies of his comic Mad Men. He also provides the artwork for the in-universe fictional comic book Bluntman and Chronic. His art gained wider recognition in the early 2000s when he started providing artwork for writer Peter Milligan's series X-Force, a run that replaced the Rob Liefeld-style aggressive militant mutant group with a new cast in the form of a group of self-interested young mutants who were gathered together by a corporation to become media stars, and subsequently became x-statix. At the same time, the characters similarly rebranded in story. The original X-Force comics were still selling well, they just weren't the sales juggernaut that editorial wanted at the time. Milligan and Allred, with this new X-Force, would regularly play with killing off the title characters. In their first issue, they wiped out the entire team, with only 2 exceptions, and was the first comic in 30 years to not pass the Comic Code Authority approval seal, rejecting the issue requiring changes to be made. Instead of making the changes, X-Force 116 was the reason Marvel stopped submitting comics to the CCA altogether. I will say, while in a similar pop art style to iZombie, that issue has way more gore, blood, and exposed skeletal structures than iZombie ever has. This dramatic revision of the series was not universally accepted. Many readers wanted their X-Force back, a complaint Milligan later parodied in the pages of the title. Some have described the series as a hostile takeover of the X-Men paradigm. However, the title was receiving mainstream media coverage in titles like Rolling Stone and was critically acclaimed, though sales were only modest. X-Statix courted controversy in 2002 by intending the deceased Diana, former real-life Princess of Wales, who had been dead in the real world for approximately 5 years, to join the X-Statix team for a 5-part storyline. News got out in the royal family and British media, and needless to say, that storyline didn't come to fruition. The series' decline in sales was cancelled in 2004, with a brief miniseries in 2006, then a giant-sized special in 2019, followed by a 5-part sequel series titled The Excellent in 2020. In 2004 and 2005, Allred wrote and drew The Golden Plates, an adaptation of the Book of Mormon, in collaboration with his wife, Laura Allred. He also did a 2008 issue of Fables, in 2012, a single issue of Daredevil with Mark Waid, the cover of which was used as the book jacket for the omnibus collection of the run. Allred and writer Matt Fraction crafted a Fantastic Four spin-off series, FF, in 2013, primarily featuring the Scott Lang Ant-Man, She-Hulk, the Inhumans Queen Medusa, and Darla Deering, a pop star that dated Johnny Storm for a short time, then was given 2 Thing rings that created a mix of a Thing exoskeleton with invisible force bubbles around her exposed head when Johnny and the main Fantastic Four team departed the universe for an extended duration of time. The Allreds had worked with Mark Russell in 2022 and 2024 to make Superman Space Age 2022 and Batman Dark Age 2024. According to Digital Spy, the opening credits to the CW's iZombie live-action TV show features artwork by Michael Allred. Laura Allred, she/her pronouns, is a prolific comics colorist and letterer. The bulk of her work is with her previously discussed husband, Michael Allred, for a variety of his publishers. The first comic of Mike's that Laura colored was the 1990s Graphique Musique, issue 1. It was Mike's first shot at a full-color book that involved what Laura describes as a horrible process where she watercolored pages with gray-lined line work printed on it that puckered from the process throwing the registration off. It was a shot-in-the-dark process the publisher thought would be more affordable. Laura reckons her and Mike have never been completely satisfied with any printed work, always looking for ways to make it better. The couple were originally worried about getting sick of each other working together full-time, but according to Mike, it only brought them closer together. Laura has downplayed the contributions of her work in interviews, saying Michael does pretty much everything in the art process except selecting the colors. Laura had not considered in the early days that she'd become an integral part of the look of Mike's art. Laura had taken art classes in college and had kept her hand in painting throughout her life, but it had not occurred to her to do it professionally. It was initially a convenience for Mike that blossomed into something wonderful for them to create together. In the early days, Laura was working as a jeweler, a job she hated because it was more about sales than any kind of creativity. Laura also colors other stories at publishers such as Dark Horse, DC, and Oni Press. Laura's process around the time of iZombie being made was specifically finding a way to avoid a digital look. Mike was doing more textured work that Laura would then scan in halftones, so there's less actual work to do on the computer and more on the actual original page. Brushstrokes form washes, graphite textures, and tones. They were doing more and more with animation influences, where Laura would end up doing full painted background paintings for Mike's layouts, and he'll do the figures separately, combining them on the computer. Laura Allred has received multiple awards for her colouring over the years, including the Eisner Award for colouring in 2012 on the iZombie book. Laura's solo colorist work has included Dark Horse's Lady Killer and a mix of cover and in-book coloring over the first 30 issues of Catwoman's 2018 comic run. Laura and Mike have also worked with Mike's brother Lee on books including Bug, The Adventures of Forager, and Dick Tracy. House of Mystery, Annual Number 1 Recap. A mysterious bandaged man has a man held captive in his house. Gwen Dillon and friends, as part of Halloween tradition, ring the doorbell for candy. As a trivia point, one of the kids is dressed up for Halloween as the Allreds' main Madman character, as you can see on the slide in front of you, towards the bottom right, I believe. House of Mystery Annual General Thoughts. Ammo noticed that the trade paperback starts with the short comic, so they thought they might as well talk about it. Ammo is always a big fan of stories set during Halloween, and also loves the trope of monsters being able to go out and about without disguises on Halloween. Gwen's Shaun of the Dead costume is also great, a fun little introduction to the core characters, and the weird mummy guy is intriguing. Jade's thoughts. This was a quick introduction to the universe. The Halloween costumes of the trio are both appropriate and hilarious. iZombie, Issue 1, Recap. Dead to the World. Gwen Dillon is a zombie who works as a gravedigger in Eugene, Oregon in order to be close to a ready food supply. She needs to eat one brain a month, or she turns into a shambling creature of the night of the living dead. After going out for the evening to Dixie's firehouse with her ghost friend Ellie and the were-terrier Spot, Gwen is spotted by Diogenes and Horatio, who work for an organization dedicated to stamping out the living dead. Horatio, seeing Gwen from a distance, is attracted to her, not realizing she is a zombie. Gwen does not see Horatio. In other parts of town, a group of female vampires have set up blood sports paintball as a front to lure men into the woods at night. Isolated, the men become vampire snacks as part of a catch and release program, released with no memory of their encounter. Gwen returns to the cemetery without incident and digs up her latest meal. When she eats brains, she also gets the memories that they come with. Her most recent snack was murdered, so she promises to find the killer so his memories stop haunting her. Issue 1 Thoughts. Ammo felt this issue was very stuck in 2011. The sexist taunts from Gwen's gravedigger co-workers that passed without much examination. The unnecessary eye candy of Gwen undressing. Even the characterization of Scott/Spot as a sort of lovable, pathetic white guy nerd. You wouldn't see that sort of thing in a comic written today. Ammo liked Ellie's character design, with her two-tone quadrant dress and her bouffant haircut. It's instantly iconic. And the last few pages of this issue are fantastic, where Gwen digs up the grave from the start of the issue to chow down on some brains and proclaims, "I am a zombie after all. Did I forget to mention that? So camp and silly and over the top." Jade's thoughts. A lot of story threads are being set up already. Jade agrees with Ammo's comments on the sexism. Initially, Jade wasn't sure why Gwen was a grave digger, but now realizes that it's the perfect fit. Joshy's thoughts. You are both absolutely correct that the sexist taunts from Gwen's co-workers pass without examination, and I want to be clear that I'm not condoning them. They're barbaric. And yes, a 2010 book is going to feel a little 2011-ish. However, I do want to point out that just because they're saying those things, the comic isn't condoning what's being said. It's being used as an effective shorthand to establish Gwen's life has gone downhill and she's checked out, doing the daily grind to get the paycheck and have an excuse to be around in that location to get her meals. And what Gwen's experiencing and staying tight-lipped about in the workplace wasn't uncommon in the 2000s for women. And while we like to think we are intimately better as a society in a post-Me Too movement world, with employers HRing HR'd up to the hilt to avoid liability, there are probably professions, both in the working class and at the opposite end for the insufferably rich, that still have those ugly behaviors present, so it's sadly not as irrelevant as it used to be. I think it feels 2011-y in how they're directly showcasing it as a part of the world, whereas a 2025 written comic would probably, for social politeness, be all sunshine and rainbows, regarding that part of the profession, unless it was the hot social movement of the week. As for Scott and or Spot, he is definitely pulling on the same archetype of Xander and Buffy or Seth Cohen in the OC, which isn't used as much anymore, a one-liner male best friend that judges or womanizes the female lead. However, I will say, having read the full 28-issue run, they do somewhat address the archetype. Literally, the first or second issue of the next volume shows the generationally taught toxic masculinity he grew up with. However, it has, and also has not, been passed on to him. You also get to see some of the same scenes from this issue with Scott play out from his perspective, and they sort of show how sad his take on the same social interaction is. The remainder of the series also does explore, wait, why has he never kissed a girl or had a relationship with a woman? He seems to maintain friendships with women okay, even if they're portrayed as being slightly pitying of him when engaging in said friendship. He's almost trying too hard to fit an expectation of him rather than reflecting who he is. iZombie Issue 2 Recap Working Stiffs. Scott's co-workers become suspicious when Scott doesn't want to join them after work. They tease Scott about meeting a secret lover once a month. Scott turns into a wereterrier every full moon and hides out in his apartment on those nights. Gwen has been painting the images in her head from her latest meal, trying to piece together how he was murdered. She paints his wife and child, a mysterious redhead, a mummy, and a house. Ellie recognizes the house and she and Gwen make plans to visit it. Gwen meets her latest snack's widow and child in the cemetery and has an awkward moment when personal memories intrude. Nemia, the leader of the blood sports paintball vampires, is furious that someone has been making trips into town for snacks. She vows to finish anyone who puts her organization at risk. Meanwhile, in town, Horatio and Diogenes discover a corpse, David from the paintball group last issue, and realize it was the vampire's work. Mr. Mummy is at home, talking to a snow leopard who appears to understand him. He regrets killing his latest victim, but justifies it by pointing out he was not a good man. Mr. Mummy is pleased that his recent treatment is coming along quite nicely. Ellie is slightly depressed that she will never get to visit the places she always dreamed about. Ghosts are bound to only the locations they visited in their lifetimes. Spot's friends are hit on by Claire, a member of the local vampire tree, and Diogenes and Horatio begin their bloodsucker hunt. Issue 2's thoughts. Ambrose struggled to get engaged with the plotline about the coven of bitchy vampires and the scenes with the two monster hunters. It all felt a bit cliched. Luckily, the scenes with Gwen are solid enough. Ammo particularly liked the scene where Fred's brain takes over and Gwen has an awkward encounter with his grieving widow and son. Jade appreciates bitchy vampires who try to minimize human death while getting their meals. Unfortunately, there's always one vampire who gets greedy. iZombie Issue 3 Recap The Dead of Night. Claire picks up Ashok Patel in a nightclub. She takes him outside looking for a private place so she can feast on him. She bumps into Gwen and Ellie outside of Dixie's, knocking Gwen down. Horatio and Diogenes were tailing Claire. Horatio and Gwen have a moment of heavy attraction, but they only have time to quickly exchange names before Horatio takes up his pursuit of Claire again. Gwen has been flashing on the memories of her most recent meal, an all-around good family man with a loving wife and child. Then, after a car accident, he changed. He could not control his impulses and emotions, lashing out at his family and having an affair with a mysterious woman in the process. Spot finds out the house in Gwen's vision is owned by a Jean Amon. Gwen and Ellie stake it out. After waiting for a long time and seeing no lights on, Ellie enters. As she is a ghost, she cannot be hurt. Gwen waits, then breaks in to go after Ellie. Gwen notices the inside is well kept and with a nice art collection. Hearing voices, she enters a room and is greeted by Jean Amon, a snow leopard, and Ellie. Jean Amon tells Gwen it is a pleasure to finally meet her. Spot is having a quiet evening at home in wereterrier form due to the full moon. Vincent uses the spare key to enter Scott/Spot's apartment to tell him about the woman Ashok picked up at the bar and discovers Scott in wereterrier form in his boxes. In an alley, Claire and Ashok have lost Horatio and Diogenes. Claire bares her fangs to make her move on Ashok. Issues 3's thoughts. For Ammo, Gwen comes off a little bit cold in this issue. Sure, she's got Fred's brain in her, but she can't even be bothered to check if it's a full moon or not before she calls her friend Scott. Ammo also didn't like the meet-cute between Gwen and Horatio, the Nancy Drew amateur detective antics where Gwen and Ellie break into Amon's house for fun though, as well as a scene where Scott gets caught by Vincent to wear terrier form. His monkey telephone is ridiculous and a great little detail. The insta-love... The insta-love between Gwen and Horatio are giving Jade vibes like an Archie comic. This relationship won't complicate anything at all. Certainly not in a Buffy the Angel way. iZombie Issue 4 Recap. The Magical Memory Tour. Jean Amon reveals that he is a mummy from ancient Egypt and explains information on the different types of undead to Gwen Dillon. Meanwhile, Diogenes and Horatio confront Claire, who is on a date with Ashok Patel. Claire gets silver daggered and thrown in Horatio and Diogenes' truck. Issue 4 Thoughts. Amro found this issue quite lore-heavy, so I appreciated the cutaways to the vampire hunting action to keep the pace flowing. The concepts of undersouls and oversouls is an interesting take, but the reveal that Horatio and Diogenes are part of a secret society of ancient monster hunters didn't excite Ammo. Secret societies are a very well-worn trope, and Roberson doesn't put any exciting new spin on it. Jade appreciated a little lore dump here, but isn't sure it was needed. She would be interested to hear other readers' takes on this. Joshi's thoughts. Joshi very much thinks that the lore dump, having read all 28 issues, is super essential because it's setting the bare bones of what will essentially be built upon for the remaining volumes of iZombie. Because going into and exploring all the different aspects of the supernatural is what those additional volumes are going to do. And so I am grateful to have that singular issue there as a guide to push me through as a resource or as a reference book, basically, for when things come up later on. iZombie Issue 5 Recap. Diogenes and Horatio bury Claire out in the woods, but Nemi and her vampire pals find their housemate's corpse soon afterwards, and a dropped Settlers Inn keycard that will likely lead them to Diogenes and Horatio. Jean Amon asks Gwen Dillon to team up with her, leveraging that Gwen consuming brains once a month isn't preventing memory loss, proven by Gwen being unable to recall how she died. Gwen goes home to think about it. Scott and Vincent Tan, who has learned that Scott is a were-terrier, play video games and then head over to Dixie's Firehouse, the local diner. There they run into Gwen, whom is not happy that Spot has revealed his secret, as Vincent Tan's now a breath away from knowing Gwen's own secret. As she leaves the diner, she has a meet-cute bumping into Horatio. Horatio walks Gwen home and they talk, finding that they have a lot in common, like a real down-to-earth version of the rom-com trope. However, Gwen gets an eerie feeling when Horatio tells her that he is a hunter for the corporation and suspects that he is a monster hunter. We also get flashes of a blonde-haired boy looking at the photo of a girl he misses, potentially his sister, who vaguely resembles Gwen potentially. We also see a mysterious woman collects Claire's body, who we'll find out in a couple issues is called Galatea, but also likes being called Mistress. Fred's memories having faded from Gwen's conscience, Gwen returns to the graveyard, ending this first trade by hanging with ghost friend Ellie, who prepared a picnic. Issue 5's Thoughts. Ammo's thoughts. Amon is obviously lying about why Gwen can't remember her past, right? Ammo was also still very much not on board so far with Horatio as a romantic interest for Gwen. His character is so incredibly flat and boring. Future issues might address this depth of and its lack, though. Gwen and Ellie's friendship continues to be delightful to read, though. The scene where Ellie surprises Gwen with a picnic of lemonade and snack cakes, I couldn't manage anything heavier, was great. The little teaser of Gwen's brother was also intriguing. Joshi likes that the issue ends on the solid touchstone of unconventional female friendship. Like Gwen and Ellie, if they weren't supernatural beings, would not hang out with one another, being so different, but through the forced bondage of being similarly supernatural, they've got a lovely friendship. Jade liked that there are a few intriguing story threads set up by the end of this issue, and thus by the end of this volume. Don't care about Amon's plot? How about the strange skunk-haired woman standing over the vampire corpse then? Don't care about the secret society guys or the bitchy vampires that will catch up with them soon? How about the hint that the blonde guy is pre-zombie Gwen's brother? Something for every reader. General discussion. So as mentioned, this comic was adapted into a CW live-action series. Gwen Dillon was adapted into a character called Liv Moore. Instead of being a gravedigger, she's a mortuary assistant, and zombies are the only supernatural species over the course of the 5-season show. So zero ghosts, were-terriers, or mummies, nor any of the characters seen in the comics. The premise of the show is Liv Moore eating the brains of the deceased, learning how they died, and helping the police solve murders and other crimes while taking on the personality traits of the brains Liv consumes. The way zombies originated also differed in the TV show, originating from a science-based approach, whereas the comics are going a more supernatural, mystical route. A fun element the TV show added was each episode having Liv prepare the brains as an ingredient in a different food recipe, from smoothies to pies to gourmet tacos and a bunch of other dishes. If you were a zombie, what food would you include brains inside of to get your brains fix in a tastier way? Please list it down in the comments below. Jade's overall thoughts. Jade is usually the wrong person to read this sort of comic because she is a delicate flower who gets queasy. However, she got through it and actually had a good time. The story gave her Fables x Buffy the Vampire Slayer vibes because the story played with tropes for fantasy monsters that people would be familiar with, has sassy, humorous female heroines, and, less positively, is speckled with dated sexist jokes. The flat colors and Archie reminiscent art really helped keep the story fun for Jade. Fun bonus question: if you were a zombie in the iZombie world, what gourmet meal would be the tastiest meal you'd make to get your daily brain consumption requirements? Jade has relatives who delight in consuming non-human brains IRL, but Jade herself refuses to try. If Jade must continue as a zombie, maybe it would be more bearable if the brains could be battered and fried, like they do in some restaurants. Maybe a strong garlic sauce would assist. Whatever makes the brain not taste or feel like an organ. Favorite Jade panel? The cat friend seriously looks like one of those badly taxidermied animals here. Also appreciating the Frankenstein discussion. Amber was very familiar with the CW's iZombie series, so they tried hard to put the show out of their head and appreciate this comic on its own merits. Overall, Amber thought it was a pretty decent book. Gwen is a very likable protagonist and makes for a refreshingly different take on the zombie genre. The idea of a zombie who gains the memories of the brains they eat is just a genius premise. The comic shines in the scenes where Gwen is just hanging out with her friends, doing amateur detective work, or simply confronting the realities of her predicament. It's a shame the rest of the comic is bogged down with some trite vampire versus monster hunter shenanigans and an unconvincing romance plotline with Gwen and Horatio. Amber would be interested to keep reading to see where the stuff with Amon goes, and also to see more of Gwen's brother and learn about the mystery of her past. Ammo's favourite panel and cover. This fantastic page from issue 1. I want it on a shirt. So iconic. Favourite cover was the one for issue 2. Also wouldn't mind this on a t-shirt. The limited colour palette really makes it stand out. I actually think I like Allred better as a cover artist rather than an in-book artist, with the extra attention to detail and how the colour pops. Best dish to contain brains of a zombie. Probably like ravioli or some kind of filled pasta. Then Amber wouldn't have to look at the brains. They'd be stuffed inside the pasta. Alternatively, hide the brains inside some wontons or dumplings or something. Joshy's thoughts. If you couldn't tell, I love this series, especially because of the art. The Allreds suit this off-kilter take of the zombie genre so well, and being a non-realistic pop art, it ensures the gory eating of brains is never overwhelming to the more squeamish readers like myself. Gwen is a fascinating protagonist because she's quite self-centered. She's not a person inclined to do things out of the goodness of her heart if they're not going to benefit her, but may make exceptions for friends and family. She wants to be a neutral force, staying out of the fray despite who attempts recruiting her, and believe me, Amon is not the only one that tries. Over the course of the whole series, ultimately the friendship with Ellie, and a lesser extent Spot, is what gives her some likability. Ellie I like, though she is mainly a plot device between other people's storylines through the book, though it does make her connective tissue between all the varied plot lines as a result. You do get an issue dedicated to her life pre-Ghost, and it's definitely a bitter-sweet gut punch. Having read this series, Scott ends up being the character you root for in this series. To use a bad pun, he really is the metaphoric underdog. He admittedly is more salad dressing in this first volume, but the journey he goes on over the next 3 volumes, as a reader, I constantly found myself wanting to see him overcome the next internal hurdle. If you enjoyed this comic, my suggestions for further reading includes more iZombie, which gets much more complicated with extra covert government organizations. One of the characters you've met goes on a journey with their sexuality. There's a talking chimpanzee with a swinging love life, interdimensional tears, the number of supernatural beings in town skyrockets, including Cthulhu-like monsters, and more of Gwen Dillon's past is revealed, including the mysterious blonde boy. Also, there's a map of the town that has a hilly area called Skinner's Butt, obviously a Simpsons reference. Alternatively, any of Allred's Marvel work with their Fantastic Four book, or especially the Silver Surfer run, which is, surprise, surprise, the exact book that we will be covering for next month's Comic Club. Thank you, and good night. Chomp. What comics has Joshy been reading besides the Comic Club books for the month of July? I read Navigating With You by Jeremy Whitley and Cassio Ribeiro. It's a cute indie Pride Month graphic novel about 2 young women. Nisha Sparks, a disabled vocal community activist with a passion for costume design, and Gabby Graciana, an optimistic surfer and a new kid at school. When the 2 girls discover that they like the same manga series, Navigator Nozomi, they become more than just fellow new kids, but it was more than just having read the same book series. Neither of them had finished it. Soon they become new friends on a mission to track down the remaining Navigator Nozomi books. This slice-of-life romance follows the 2 girls as they adventure across North Carolina to find each book, with their story intercut with inserts of the tales of Navigator Nozomi in different manga-esque art styles. Nisha and Gabby find more than just the books, though. They find acceptance, friendship, understanding, and love. Speaking of LGBT plus comics, I'm currently reading The Croaking by Megan Gray on Webtoon about gay military angels who seem to be experiencing the winged angel version of Greece, spending the summer meeting on a rocky outlook, then summer finishes, they think they'll never see each other again, then they're allocated to the same dorm in their military academy, but one of them is pretending he doesn't know the other. I read the first issue of the 2025 Justice League Unlimited series. Not much to say at this stage, except that Dan Mora is an excellent artist. I've sampled a little bit of the All-Star Superman that inspired the Superman movie. I'm not a big fan of the art, and being a Grant Morrison book, everything is very wordy so far. I've read the first couple issues of the new Supergirl series, written and drawn by Sophia Campbell and Tamara Bonvillain, about Supergirl returning to her hometown, only to discover her parents don't remember her, and there's an imposter Supergirl that everybody in town loves. She begins questioning if she actually is the real Supergirl, and sets out to prove she's the genuine article. More LGBT comics. I finished The Question All Along the Watchtower, starring Renee Montoya, wraps things up nicely, and it seems like the plan is for the character to be folded into the Justice League Unlimited comics from about issue 14 onwards. DC Pride 2024, it's one overarching story this year, but each LGBTQIA plus hero is their own separate bubble in the story, allowing a different creative team to tackle each section of the story before they all team up at the end. Like always, some parts work better than others, but an interesting execution, though given the plot, one that only works once. My one sad note is there is no Tim Drake bubble explored, despite the character popping up as the heroes are congregating. In bright news, Tim Drake looks to be getting used in issue 2 of the new Batman series coming out by Matt Fraction and Jorge Jimenez, though interestingly, he appears to be sporting a new variation of his Red Robin suit. See the cover snapshot on the bottom right of the slide. I've also been reading some webcomics on the DC Infinite app. If you make a free DC Infinite account, there are free comics that can be read from their DC Go vertical webtoon style comics section, which includes Aquaman, Yo Ho Hold Onto Your Hook with a gay male lead, John Kent, This Internship Is My Kryptonite with a bisexual male lead, Warriors and a Wee Wanda with a female lesbian secondary character, Nubia, and then Harley Quinn in Paradise with a bi or poly female lead. And I can confirm the queer rap in the Aquaman, the John Kent, and the Amazon Warrior ones are proper representation with love interests. There's also some non-rainbow rap with nothing but Nightwing, which isn't my cup of tea writing-wise, and it doesn't help that a comic with a butt in the title has drawn Nightwing with barely a pastry, where a whole ass cake shelf should be. There's also a Shazam comic, which is very similar to the first movie, except replaces the foster mother with a tiger and has fewer foster kids, and a comic called My Little Warlord, based on a character from 1970s Warlord comics. There's also a comic called Taste of Justice, about different foods being cooked throughout the DC universe, each issue with a different set of characters. The first issue is Clark and Lois having a date night, where Lois plans to make Clark his favorite meal. Except being a working woman, she knows nothing about cooking, so gets her boss Perry White to mentor her on how to make a beef bourguignon, with assistance from Jimmy Olsen too. Very wholesome and cutesy. If a strange request for your boss, and I'll let others determine whether it's positive or negative female representation. As for non-comic genre books, I finished I'll Have What He's Having by Adib Khorram, about the wine sommelier and restaurant worker that have a mistaken identity meet cute turned will they won't they. Very satisfying ending. And I also blitzed my way through Don't Let Me Go by Kevin Christopher Snipes. Was very gay and bisexual awakening version of Hawkman and Hawkgirl idea of reincarnated lovers meeting again and again throughout all of history. Though some definite potential content and trigger warnings with the ending of that book.